talk fast. Thanks to Ottawa County for putting together, I think, a nice balanced panel here to get out information to you. They did give us all special requests that came out of our 15 minutes, so I cried foul on that. I thought that was worth extra time. But they did want me to start tonight to talk a little bit about the history of hydraulic fracturing. In Michigan, we have a long history of oil and gas development, 90-year history. There's about 60,000 wells that have been drilled over that time span. Currently, we have 4,500 active oil wells, 11,000 gas wells, and we have approximately 1,300 injection wells around the state. Of that 1,300 wells, about 700 of them are disposal wells. The rest would be injection wells for secondary recovery. We also are number one in the United States in gas storage. We have about 3,000 gas storage wells around the state using old depleted reservoirs. They're able to pump gas down into those reservoirs in the summer during low peak times. They pull that gas back up out of the ground during the winter during peak times. If you look at Ottawa County a little closer, just to give you an idea what that map looks like, the green wells are oil wells, the red are gas, and the bluish are your injection wells. Just going back, I want to point out this red arc across the top of the mitten here. Those are about 12,000 Antrim wells, and that's going to come up, I think, a couple times in my talk for sure, if not other people's presentation today. The history of vertical fracking started in 1952 when the first hydraulic fracturing completion was done in Michigan. Over the next 60 years, like I said, we've had about 12,000 wells that have been hydraulically fractured, and the vast majority of those wells would be what you consider vertical wells. They're shallower, they use a lot less water. There may be only 1, 2, 3, 4 stages of completion because they're a vertical well. They're in less contact with the target formation that contains the hydrocarbons. They're using maybe 30, 40, 50 to 100,000 gallons of water for those completions. Those vertical wells are typically shallower and much closer to portable water supplies, aquifers. The history of horizontal fracturing, the Commission wanted me to compare that. Really, we've had directional drilling for some time, but in the 1980s, the horizontal drilling technology really started to take off, and the accuracy of the geosteering and the ability to go in a horizontal and get into a formation, a thin formation even, and stay in that formation and run that for even miles was greatly improved. So in Michigan, at least, we started seeing the application of these companies coming into reefs and target formations horizontally in the 80s in Niagara Reefs, and also a lot of it done in the Antrim. So when I say out of those 12,000 wells that are across northern Michigan, a lot of those are horizontal. Some of them were high volume, but most of them were the lower volume types. So what's kind of brought this controversy on? I won't get into energy policy, we've got other speakers for that, but just to lay the groundwork, around the mid-2000s, 2005, these improvements in technology and horizontal drilling coupled with hydraulic fracturing allowed these companies to do multi-stage completions in shale reservoirs and tight rock reservoirs that hadn't previously been developed. Michigan really kind of cut its teeth on shale gas. I was in Washington, D.C. last week, and some of the other states said, you know, you guys really kind of broke the ground on shale. And it's that arch of wells up in northern Michigan. But it's different than what you're hearing in Michigan, primarily in magnitude. There's a lot more water being used in these. To give you an example, the wells down in this area are using probably anywhere from 800,000 gallons to 3 million gallons. They're using primarily acid or a nitrogen foam to do those. The larger fractures in northern Michigan are using, what we're seeing right now is primarily between 8 and 12 million gallons to complete those. They have asked for higher quantities of water, but right now that's what we're seeing them use to complete. So this is a topic in itself, but they wanted me to explain what the difference between vertical and horizontal fracturing is. So this illustrates just simply a wellbore that goes down, and where you see it turn to horizontal, if we pretended that that's the producing formation, like the shale that they wanted to be in, when I say a vertical well, in the past they would come down with a vertical well, and if that formation was 50 feet thick that they were trying to hit, they would perforate that 50-foot zone, and they would do a couple fracture projects on that and send the fractures out into the formation. When you're talking about horizontal fracturing, you're simply talking about the fact that they turn the borehole horizontally and they run that out into the reservoir, and they do multi-stage completions. So on a completion up north where they're going down almost 2 miles and then they're going 2 miles horizontally in that formation, they may have 40 stages that are like 250 feet long each one, and they're using the larger volumes of water. That's the primary difference. Obviously, 2 mile horizontal, you've got a lot larger, more equipment, more horsepower, more water. The same basic principle applies. To give you an idea where this large volume horizontal fracturing is occurring in the mitten, it's primarily occurring right now in like Misaki, Kalkaska, Crawford, Roscommon. But as Mark said, there's also some coming down in this area. Up north, it's called the Utica-Collingwood Formation, which is a tight carbonate and shale. Down here, the companies are primarily looking at the A1 carbonate, and I think there's going to be more discussion on that. But for our purposes, those are typically using less fluids. Right now they're using a lot of acid on those. That seems to be working better than a water for them. And sort of the interest is we've had one drilled up in, one test in Oceana, one in Ionia, and now companies have permitted one nearby in Muskegon County in Urbana. We've also had a few high volume hydraulic fractures in Hillsdale County in what's called the Van Wert zone. One thing that I want to touch on that's a difference that you'll notice between vertical fracturing or vertical drilling and horizontal drilling, that large arc of red wells, the 12,000 wells in the Antrim that I showed you on that previous map, those were developed on an 80-acre spacing. So in an 80-acre parcel, you're going to have a well. So to give you an idea of surface waste, and we're concerned about surface waste as well, a typical build-out of a 36 square mile township in northern Michigan in that Antrim Shale would have had approximately 288 well pads on that. Thus the big red arch. Now this is a typo. I was putting this out to Aaron real quick yesterday, so it says per acre. Don't hold me to that. Don't call and tell me I'm crazy. That's meant to say township, not acres. So for a typical, big difference. Yeah, 288 acres in a township, and we saw that development with that 11 to 12,000 wells up there. Now, conversely, when you're talking about long horizontals, if companies are drilling 1.5 to 2 mile horizontals, you take that same 36 acre or 36 square mile township and lay something on that, you'll see multiple wells launched off from single pads. What a build-out example of that would look a lot more like 20, I don't know what I wrote here. I'm not going to do math tonight, but 20 pads per township. So they're still running pipelines and connections and there's roads going, but the surface waste potential and the surface impact is less significant with the horizontals. Just wanted to touch real briefly, our office, we have environmental regulations, but I think they're slightly different than a lot of other statutes because they deal with extractive resources. And our statutes, while all DEQ programs partner in environmental or in economic development, provide good customer service, and are focused on environmental stewardship, ours kind of have a different twist because they recognize that when you have resources in the ground like copper, nickel, oil and gas that are a benefit to society, that that they come out of the ground, that it's wasteful not to use them if they can be developed economically without wrecking the environment. So our programs, obviously the economic side of it is if companies are here looking to mine or to take out oil and gas, then they're economic. So our program focuses on the environmental side of that. Part 615, supervisor of wells. This is the statute that regulates oil and gas from its cradle to grave. My group in Lansing, we primarily focused on the permitting, bonding, and reporting side of things, as well as the petroleum technology. We get heavily involved with the initial location and reviewing companies' planning of their cementing and casing programs. That redundancy in that plan is key to us. Hopefully, if I don't run out of time, I got 4.5 minutes left. I'll touch on that a little bit more. Once it's permitted, we turn it over to our area geologists who are responsible for being on site both during the drilling, construction, as well as the well completion phase, which would include hydraulic fracturing. We target to get out to those sites about 3 times a week and to be in communication continually with these companies. When our geologists are out on sites, they're reviewing the records to make sure cementing wait times match up, drilling speeds, looking around for spills and losses. We've also got them tethered with cell phones 24/7. In the oil and gas industry, they're responsible for reporting all spills and losses, even de minimis small spills. Odor complaints, like I said, we have our geologists tethered to respond to those instances day and night. We're also oversee waste, and with our air quality division, we work on the emissions. Typically on a single oil well site, emissions do not exceed any thresholds that require air quality permitting, renewable operating permits, but where you do get sites gathering together in lines and going to the central production facility, it's common that they are regulated by air quality and have a renewable operating permit. So we do work hand in hand with them. The EPA just passed new regulations for green completions on the hydraulic fracturing completions in industry, recognizing that the oil and gas industry, they're the #1 emitter of methane, which is a potent greenhouse gas. I suppose the good news is the industry, through the shale gas development, the whole time they're greatly expanding their production, their greenhouse footprint has been going down, the amount of methane emissions. And I think they've got further that they can go with that. They can destroy methane during tests by using flares. They can work on recovery. And in the case of the company up north that's operating, they want to test and flow into wells. So they want that gas to go into sales, and they don't want to see the waste. Finally, we're involved in plugging and restoration of the site. That's really important and near and dear to my heart. When the company leaves, we don't want to see them leave a mess. 90 years of history, I can't say that we've always gotten it right. In the 30s, 20s, wells were not plugged to today's standards with cement. I mean, sometimes they had pine plugs down them. Sometimes during the Depression, they took the casing, the upper casings off and put a cannonball down there. And so we have an orphan well program that we've spent a fair amount of time going in and fixing some of the legacy issues, and we do have the ability to pull money from the severance taxes that the oil and gas industry pays to run our orphan well program. But I guess for me, who I still have some longevity hopefully in this agency, I want to see us not have to deal with legacy issues, but while we have active companies, that it's done right. I do want to mention this, I'm running out of time. Monumental to regulating the oil and gas industry on fracking. As it picked up in 2010 in Michigan, in 2011 we passed the supervisor of wells instruction that clarified the requirements that we wanted to put on companies, additional requirements for water withdrawal assessment, water level monitoring, reporting of fracturing pressures and annulus pressures, as well as volumes, and increased public disclosure, chemical disclosure in the form of material data safety sheets. This is what we focus on. I'm going to get the gong and the crook here. So hopefully we can circle back around a little bit during questions and answers and hit some of these, because I do know they do want me to talk a little bit more about what we do to protect aquifers, because I know that subject's near and dear to the folks' heart here in Ottawa County. So we'll do that. I just want to leave you with the fact that there's a couple large studies going on at U of M and nationally with the EPA. I put these pictures up here because we've got 60 FTEs, full-time equivalent positions in Michigan regulating the oil and gas industry. I heard from the North Dakota Environmental Quality Director last week in DC that they've got 8 FTEs for the Bakken. So I feel that we're well-staffed as management and OOGM. We invest heavily in our people to get them trained, make sure they've got the right equipment. We invest in our databases, trying to improve transparency, and you know, everything's on the table. This sort of format, even though it's public outreach and we do a lot of these to folks, it's also a listening session for us, so we can continually hear what the public's concerned about. We talk with environmental groups, industry. The future, hopefully, we're going to be incurring more green chemistry, water reuse. That doesn't come without its own problems. Right now we have a very good program because we require flowback to go to steel-lined pits. When you ask for recycling of water, you really can't do that when you're talking about the scales that we have without introducing above-ground or in-ground pits for flowbacks. So we proceed with caution. We don't leave, we don't shut the door, and certainly we want to encourage companies in that way, but you have to look at all angles of these issues. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Adam.